I'd like to introduce myself. First, I'm JC Vega. I am the CISO at Devo, and I have three wonderful guests today who I can call mentors, coaches, colleagues, and most importantly, friends. So I'd like to first introduce our group of panelists. From Johnson & Johnson, the CISO, the legendary Maureen Allison. We also have the CISO from Prescriptive, Mary Franz, and the managing director and the overseer of data care, Cindy Gula. Welcome to today's panel discussion where we celebrate Women's History Month. So with that, let's start with the first question for the group here. And Maureen, I'm going to start with you. Growing up, who were your superheroes and did they look like you?
So one of my very first superheroes was Abigail Adams. Of course, she didn't look like me because she had died a couple hundred years prior. But what she did in the state of Massachusetts and growing up in Massachusetts, where equality, women's equality is just seen as a natural, I never saw that women were anything unequal. Like it wasn't even a concept. So I would have to say that Abigail Adams was probably one of my very first superheroes and everything she did. And especially with her husband, there are many who think it was John Adams that was able to do all those writings, but I'm fairly certain Abigail had a hand in it.
No, and that's one of the primary readings I had to read in my undergraduate political science degree, the story of Abigail Adams. And so a follow-up, Mary, what about you?
Well, I had multiple superheroes, of course, given when I was growing up, none of them were in cyber necessarily, but they all represented something a little different. One of my favorite people to read was Madeleine Albright. And I used to get the copies of Foreign Affairs Journal, and I was always impressed, not only with her writing, but the fact that she was one of the very first people in the State Department who actually covered security, particularly during the Cold War. And most of her writing was prolific. It was incredible, and she hit it nail on the head each time. My other two, one was Eleanor Roosevelt. I admired her. I've read about her. I've read her autobiographies. I was always just so impressed with the way she handled herself, particularly in the face of diversity and how she stood up for what she believed in. And then for true grit, it was Harriet Tubman.
And that's a story all in itself. And I noticed you both picked statesmen or stateswomen as some of your heroes there. So that's really interesting that these people who stood by, we know the male figure, but we also have to recognize their partners in this, in life and in their careers. So with Eleanor Roosevelt and Abigail Adams. Now, I'm really interested in Cindy Gula's answer because I know she's a sci-fi connoisseur and she loves it. So I'm wondering if this person is even actually a person who was your hero.
No, you nailed that one. Yeah, growing up and when I saw a superhero, I loved Wolverine, just from the X-Men. I mean, talk about, somebody who wanted to be alone, but he kept getting pulled back into society and always had that need to help. And it was the lesser person. I mean, here he's invincible and he can attack and he, doesn't jump into a fight because he's not fearful, but because he knows it's the right thing to do, even if he just wants to be alone. And he just keeps coming back and then he finds the family. And Wolverine, hands down, my favorite X-Men. And then I honestly, this other one I was thinking actually is a real person, and it's Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Because imagine the amount of angst, personal, threat he was under, yet he believed so hard in what was right in humanity And he was able to get people who didn't look like him to be on his side and understand that this was the right thing to do, and go plow through all that history. He doesn't care what the history was. He wanted to write the history where it should be. And so I'm just a forward thinker. I just really want to make sure that what is done now positively impacts the future.
I really like the theme you at least I picked up on from both of those individuals, as do the right thing. And they were driven by doing what is right. We're now in this era of cyber where it's front page news. You're seeing it from the federal government and nation states. And it's something that is ubiquitous in our day to day, whether you're in cyber or not. So this is kind of a twisted question. When did you realize that you were in cyber? And when did you realize, did you want to be a leader in cyber? How did you get where you are today in cyber? Let's start with you, Mary.
Well, I had the wonderful opportunity of being hired by a multinational conglomerate that was in defense. And so I ended up as one of the few, I think only women taken from the research and development data center. I've been with the company for 1.5 years and placed on a ship in the Persian Gulf to help with the Fortran programming. And I realized during that time, we were actually spying on Russia. That's the bottom line. And we were doing it by taking, basically getting the magnetic inferences off of the cables underneath the ground. And I got a chance to see that firsthand. And that was incredible. And I was so curious about how they worked with it. Again, that wasn't called cyber at that time, but because I was very bold and said I was curious about it, wanted to learn, and was willing to put in the hours to learn it, I ended up actually leading the project of where the data was recaptured, placed upon those large movie reel tapes, and brought back to the data center in Dallas, where I was then sent back to. And I spent about a year deciphering it with a whole bunch of people from all over the country. And that was really, really cool. And from there, to me, cyber is like a huge detective story. It's not about, cyber came on after the internet, but it's always been security, protecting information, protecting the integrity of that information, and then seeing what you could do with it. But that whole foray that I did was that could be interpreted today as offensive security. And that is where I really just love this industry.
Now, you started there, but you've testified for the Supreme Court, for members of Congress, and for other prominent organizations. And what you were doing then at the time was sci-fi, but you were actually doing it. So that's going to lead me to Cindy Gula, the managing director at Gula Tech Foundation here, or Gula Tech Adventures. How about you? When did you realize you were in cyber?
So my degree is in glass engineering science. And I laughed, Mary, when you said Fortran. That's when I knew I didn't want to program, because that's what I had to program in. So I was like, wow, that's really kind of difficult to follow. However, it was great because I learned what programming was. And for me personally, I learned that's not what I wanted to do, but I knew it was part of everything else that we needed. So I had that ground understanding. But for me, I kind of got in again by accident, blind date, got introduced to somebody who worked at this place called NSA. And when I asked him what it was, he said, no such agency. And I asked, do you want a second date? And he then said the National Security Agency. And I said, I really don't understand what that is. And keeping in mind, I graduated from a very rural place in New York State. I graduated with 39 people in my public school class. So I have a very rural and narrow local way of looking at things. So I moved on to Maryland near the NSA. And my husband came home and said, I got an idea for a company. And I was like, well, all the accounting and lawyers and everybody else seemed to be partying more while I was studying, and they still seemed to pass. So I figured it wasn't that hard. So, we got an accountant, got a lawyer, started a company, and basically ran that. And that was in 98. That was Network Security Wizards. It was an intrusion detection system. So I learned basically how insecure things were built as structured. They were just created to do something, but security was the afterthought. And so growing up through that in 2002, Ron and I started Tenable Network Security. So that married the vulnerability assessment to a vulnerable system. And so it was like an offense and defense put together to then learn more about your network. Again, all on this premise that things were built insecurely as we were operating. So we were basically building the plane while we were flying it. And so the onus and growth into cybersecurity as we know it today has been great, because honestly, I love this industry because we're all on the same side. We're all on that defend, and we could be competing, but we're all against that person who shouldn't be getting access to something that they shouldn't have. So how do we defend that? How do we protect? And so that's been a great journey for me. And that's kind of how I ended up here, mostly by osmosis.
It sounds like you social engineered your way into the discipline. So, and NSA probably for that matter, but we won't touch that at this moment. Maureen Allison, you're a USMA grad, a United States Military Academy grad. So you were doing security from a very early age. But when did you make that transition into cybersecurity?
Well, the bug bit me. So many people think of the class of 1980 at West Point as the first class to have a Black first captain, first class to have women. But very few people realize it's the first class to have electrical engineering as a degree. And so I took electrical engineering, and because you get your branch based on your class rank, wasn't very high. I got the last slot in military police and not the Signal Corps. So I didn't actually get into the specialty I would have liked to get into with an electrical engineering degree or concentration. And so I became a military police officer. So I kind of say those two intersections actually it set me up for the future. So I was military police for a few years, and then I got out. I went into private industry. I was at A&P grocery stores, the Great Atlantic and Pacific Tea Company. And while I was there, they were looking to, like my first big data project, right? Take 35,000 SKUs in 12 different regions of the country, and they were all different SKUs. So the SKU for Frito-Lay in New Orleans was salami in Detroit. And you had to harmonize all the data. And I loved it. It was like for me. And so we put in this ERP. We came up with this little thing called Y2K. And I realized the intersection of confidentiality, integrity, and availability. And it sort of grew in my mind. And so I had to make a choice. I stay at A&P and never get into cyber because they were literally still on a mainframe. Or did I take a chance and go to Avaya Telecommunications? So I jumped over to Avaya Telecommunications as physical security, in the physical global security. And 6 weeks after I got there, the head of IT security left. And they came to me and said, "Hey, Maureen, we're going to give you IT security." Couldn't spell it. Couldn't even spell it. So I said, okay, this is cool. I never shy away from a challenge. And oh, by the way, in June, we're going to have the World Cup in Korea and Japan. And we're using the first production application of voice over IP technology. You get to do the network security for that puppy. So that does not kill you, makes you stronger. And in this instance, it made me a CISO. I figured it out. There's actually some very smart individuals who spent a very long time with me in whiteboards, literally got a master's degree in cyber over 6 weeks. And from that perspective, I knew that I had been bitten and I love this stuff and I was going to go for the gusto.
So you were a CISO probably before a CISO was a CISO.
No, I think Steve Katz is that. He has he's the world's first CISO. I'll give it to him. He's older than I am.
Well, that's good to hear, because I remember I had a similar problem when I was running the logistics for the U.S. forces in Korea, and then the SKUs, the NSNs, we call them in the military, for a Humvee or a part in the Navy, the Marine Corps, and the Air Force and the Army, same part, but all different nomenclatures, and it just made things miserable. So I'm going to kind of a speed round here on a quick question for each of you. What is the next cyber innovation? Cindy, let's start with you.
So I think, again, data care is something that we're trying to get the public to realize that cyber is not somebody else's problem. It's your problem. And so you need to get into the game. We need to make this personal, and everybody has data. So there's personal data that you want to protect. You're part of the solution. So if you look at data care as a theme, so you need to make it personal, and it's about privacy and protection. And that's kind of how we then grow into cybersecurity. So what I want the next innovation is digital identity. How I transact online needs to be transformed, because it's not the same as paper. It's not the same as a signature. How is my identity, my data is protected? Can I define who owns my data? And from that, what I'm hoping is the public then demands that there's protection built in to anything that we're using for convenience. If my refrigerator is connected for my convenience, I want security to be built into that. And as a public, we need to demand that security first and not later. And if we continue to demand digital identity, therefore instilling protection in my identity and the products that we're utilizing for convenience are demanded to be protected, then I'm hoping those innovations together will allow the public and the entire world to get into this digital domain in a much more secure and private fashion.
Well, I really like how you take data care, and I started out with saying cyber is ubiquitous. And as we talk about that, we understand that like health, taking care of personal hygiene is universal around the globe. It's not different regardless of what language you speak or how old you are. There are certain things that you need to know. With cybersecurity being ubiquitous, we need that basic fundamental understanding of we're responsible for ourselves to a certain point, and then that escalates from there to this concept of digital identity that you just mentioned. That's fascinating. I'd love to hear more about that.
I'm sure you will.
And Maureen, what about you? What do you think the next innovation? Where's it coming from, or what should it be?
I would tell you that I go back to that original set, networking. What are we going to do about the network? The internet is a flippin' wild, wild west at its best. It is the dirtiest, ugliest place on the universe. And we want to send good data there. I'm with you, Cindy, around understanding about the data. But ultimately, my coffee pot is going to talk to a router who is owned by someone who's going to communicate to a network provider, which is going to then go into the internet. And so therefore, this concept of how do we get the technologies, let's get the venture capital actually spending time and money on the network and what items that we can do with here. I mean, we talk about things like zero trust. To me, that's a marketing term. It's really going to be segmentation of network, identification of the data, classifying it, and it's going to be a there is no silver bullet, Carlos. It's going to be that Rubik's Cube of security that we've always had to deal with, but it's going to be at a much higher stake. The nation states are getting better, and the tech companies are not getting better at what they provide us. How do we assure things like our code is secure? There aren't backdoors in it. And then how are we going to make sure that the data residing on the network is completely secure and only those who are supposed to touch it can touch it? I think we need to do the bare minimum. We're not. When I was at Avaya Telecommunications, I worked with the product people around voice over IP because they understood why it needed to be secured. But how many others didn't? And I mean, those were the days when passwords were 123 Avaya or 123 Lucent. And we hope we've moved from that. But there's still probably companies that are using 1-digit passwords or 1-factor authentication. And it's okay to do that, right? Because nobody rules it or governs it. Now, I'm not saying more rules or laws, but what I'm saying is we've got to do the bare minimum. Nobody's taking their brand new car and sitting it and leaving the keys in it and the doors open and walking away. Why do we do that with data? Why do we do that with companies?
So that kind of wraps into what Cindy was talking about, is basic fundamental principles of security that we could, if we all start using them, we will have a safer
Cyber
environment.
101. We all should have Cyber 101. I want to hear Mary's answer though, because she's going to have a unique one. I want to hear this.
I'm not sure I have a unique one, but I can say that I've grown up through the ages where I was not only working in security with the defense contractor during the first Gulf War, so I'm kind of I'm definitely one of the older crowd here, but you know, one of the things that dawned on me as I grew through my career and grew into this is that this isn't a one-horse show here. You know, one of the things that's always bugged me is being in system engineering and being in security at the same time is they're not building security into the products. And for too long, we've added security as a facade layer over everything. And we expect tools to then protect us when the core product is insecure. And that includes our data out there. Now, I don't think the internet is that bad. I also don't believe that the dark net is that bad. I think there's bad actors on it. But the internet was never meant to be secure, which is why the Navy and others developed other means, right? And the original, you know, what we call today the dark net. But here's the issue. You know, I've worked on a lot of really large internationally renowned data breaches. And the one thing that I've learned is that data breach did not happen the day that they found the threat actor in their system. It happened a year, 2, 3 years, sometimes 10 to 15 years earlier. And what we didn't have is a holistic view of how our systems work. The other thing is that as I'm mentoring kids, I used to coach a robotics team. And I actually helped them use a network sniffer to try and figure out why their iPad was not connecting with the actual robot, you know, that they're trying to, you know, run on the floor against the opponents and stuff. And so this is, to me, it's all very holistic. But when we talk about data, one of the things that I've learned is when we've done our offensive work, our threat work, or our threat actor threat hunting work, is that, quite frankly, there's so much data that has been stolen about us in certain areas that there are people that can put that into basically a big data engine, what we call AI or NoSQL and all the different terms that come with it, and actually tell us what we plan on wearing today more than we know ourselves, because there's so much data out there about us. So I agree with everything that we have to own our data. We have to figure out where it's going, but more importantly is we have to merge all this together. And I think that we are kind of on a cliff. We're coming into the age where the computers that we're using right now can only go so much longer. I mean, we want to keep making the same infrastructure faster and better. We're now seeing this quantum computing. We're seeing Li-Fi being used over in Europe instead of standard Wi-Fi. We're seeing different methods of data transfer. We're seeing blockchain come into our everyday being. It's not just something that Bitcoin used, it's something that a lot of different groups are using, and for good reason. But what it all comes down to is I think we're on a cusp where if you follow the trajectory through from like the 1960s, 70s, and 80s, some of the stuff that we're doing now is really based on the core concepts of the original technology. When we jump into quantum, everything that we're talking about is going to happen 10 times faster. So if we don't have our ducks in a row, we're really going to be in trouble. And that's where I do believe that this whole process of embedding security in everything that we do, from the cars that we build, because I mean, I don't know about you guys, but I'm one of those nerds that rents a car and sticks a USB thing underneath the steering wheel into one of the ports and sees just who rented the car before me and how stupid were they, and did they download everything off of their iPhone onto the car, you know? I don't steal it though, that's illegal. I just want to see how far I can take the hack. We're in that age, and we've also, I want to add that we've got a lot of people entering this era that didn't grow up the same way we did. They're thinking about things in a totally different way. And if we can harness that along with where we're going to go off onto the next, not just go across the plains, but literally we're going to jump onto another continent when it comes to making quantum an everyday language. I think that we're on that breaking point, and things are going to start to move even faster. But the core concepts of building security from the very first thing, if you're building a door, you're building security. If you've got a manufacturing plant that produces carpet, you want to put security on it, because that's how you're going to stay solvent, and that's where it needs to come from. So cyber isn't, I don't believe, going to become a necessarily a dedicated discipline by itself, as much as it's going to start to be embedded into everything that comes up from this time forward. And that's why it's so exciting to me. It's so exciting, because I don't know about you guys, but you mentioned the SKUs. I'm one of those nerds that actually went and got APIC certified in inventory control and just-in-time MRP and all that. So that actually gets me excited. But the first thing I think about, well, gee, if I want to manage a global retail, I got to secure that thing. Because if I secure it, I know it's going to be available. I know the data is going to have integrity. Okay. And then I know it's going to be confidential. So that's kind of where I'm coming. So it's kind of like everything we said, only I'm taking it into the next millennium of technology.
Hey, Mary, if we ever go back to the office, I just want the app to let me know what I'm supposed to wear today.
That's been my biggest challenge since I left the military, is I have to actually pick out my clothes now. So you mentioned
Hey, that was a real study. I just want to let you know. There we
No, I believe it. Like if I could go to a shoe store and it'd tell me what shoes I'm going to buy, I'd save hours.
Yeah, but again, it's not so much what they're predicting. I'm concerned with what they're going to do to weaponize my data that's already out there 5-10 years from now.
Yep.
How are they going to use that data against me? And that's why it's so important to me right now to get people to understand we need to talk about that and capture the ownership. Who owns it? How could I get it removed? How long should it be out there? But
you know what? Here's the thing. We do this with privacy, but the finance organizations, they have congressional rights to be able to take our data and then send you things about home warranties and car warranties and things like that. How do we let one group of people do whatever they want with our financial data, but then the rest of our data, everyone else is supposed to protect it for us?
Well, I just want to say one thing, because what Cindy said is really critical. And Maureen, what you just said is also really critical, because it's the weaponization also has to do with manipulation.
Yep.
So if I just can figure out what your likes and dislikes are and what you're likely to wear, if I get a whole of, enough pictures of you to kind of estimate your wardrobe, I'm going to be able to make you by pushing that stuff down to you, by manipulating what ads you can see in it. That's already happening, but where they're getting the data from is really from data breaches. It's not just from people doing stupid stuff on social media. And
but the VA and the FBI already lost all my data anyway.
Right. So again, and on top of the stuff that was supposed to be secured and is not secured, and the information, the data that we're freely given in order to get discounts or just because that's the way we do things, we need someone, regulation, conversation, understanding that this should not happen because it can be weaponized against you in the future. What if I started shopping at a different place and because my other place saw that I'm shopping there, they start charging me more money for the goods that I need?
Yeah, but what if I'm a Talbot shopper and I'm sort of dating myself as being a little too conservative, and Stitch Fix sends me an offer to update my wardrobe? Isn't that good too?
So I think what you're saying is that there's it, and I think it was Mary who mentioned it. It's not the tool, it's the motive behind
the data
it.
underneath it.
It's
what
the
are they doing
motivation.
and what do they have? But what I'm telling you is I think there's two sides of it. I think there's a bad side and an ugly side. And I also think there might be an opportunity side. And I don't know which one is worse, which one is better.
And how do you know the difference?
So what I heard, and I'm kind of summarizing, is that security has to be a main ingredient. It's not a condiment. It's not something, a facade that you put on afterwards. And the data we have to have some control of that, some way, somehow, so that someone nefarious can't take advantage of it, but we can still garner the advantages of having these data pools out there. And it goes back to Cindy and data care. So I really appreciate that. Let me ask you a final question here for each of you here. This is diversity, Women's History Month. Tell me, what's the advantage of this diversity of thought? Is it a strategic advantage? Is it a competitive advantage? Or is it just a nice thing to do?
I think it's a hugely competitive advantage. So if you look back 15, 20 years ago, most of the IT security professionals were white males. Okay. And so you had a very closed idea of what security looked like. And it was bound around a few schools, maybe some tours of duty through NSA or FBI or government service, maybe some Army military, some MI. But you really didn't have an open view of what the possibility could be. As it opened up, and women or minorities started to come in, we started to look at what could be and greatly expand. It's also, if you're looking at it as only an IT security engineer, if you only look at it from that one cyber angle, it's a very important angle, but you're not going to look at business risk. Business risk is as important as cyber risk. And you have to, and Condoleezza Rice in her book, Political Risk, on how that terms in to political risk, and I think we see that in the United States today, that diversity of thought is needed to look at all the different elements. So one might say, if we might not, would we have a vaccine today if we had not accepted from China, a researcher in China, the genome on the virus? Because that left China on January 15th, 2020. It meant the rest of the world was able to start working on a vaccine. Now, I know it's data, and you got to be careful where your data goes, but the data went for good. And so that idea and having the diversity of thought, and I'll poke a little on the privacy stuff and the security stuff, because I think it starts to become about risk. And that diversity of thought is what makes us such a awesome group. And especially these, the three charming women you had with you tonight, Carlos, is that fact that we can have these conversations and openly debate, and we get to a better place.
Now, that's a great point there. And I'm going to go to Mary. What's a competitive advantage or strategic advantage to an organization to have this diversity of thought?
Well, we just got done talking about data. We just got done talking about the manipulation and the psychological impacts of it. And if you have everyone, like Maureen said, in the room that looks the same, talks the same, came from the same background, had the same training, you're not going to get anywhere. I mean, it's always going to be the same. And first of all, that stifles innovation, but also it stifles the concept of thinking, how could we be attacked? Because you have to play offense and defense on this. You can't just play one side of the fence, and you can't play one side of the fence from one school of thought. So if you have everyone in the room, like I said, if like attracts like thinks like, that actually hurts you. And personally, the best organizations argue. And they argue and they fail forward and they keep going. And you can't do that if everyone in the room is doing the exact same thing. And when I mentioned earlier about, how we're in this generational gap where when I grew up, we had TVs we had to get up and change the channel for. And we've now got kids who are coming into this of all different shapes and sizes and backgrounds and experiences, okay, who have never seen a world outside of cyber. And they think differently, and we want them to think differently, and we want them in the workforce to challenge the status quo. We want them to be able to say, hey, why can't we do this differently? Or what if? And like I said, there's really, in this area that we're in, there really is no boundaries. It's not just about thinking about what could happen. It's about, wouldn't it be cool if we could do this to somebody else? And oh my gosh, that could happen to us. Let's change the pattern. Now, one of the things that I really like about diversity in the workforce is also, we do tend to create almost a funnel of the type of people that come into this industry, which is hurting this industry. It's also making it so that we have one of the largest deficits in qualified individuals to come into this industry than most any other industry right now in the world. I mean, there's not a state you can look up that doesn't have a 30 or 40% deficit in the people that they want in information security and cybersecurity. Okay, so that's the first thing. So everyone needs to be part of this. But the other thing is like I said, if you make this holistic, I want to get somebody who's really interested in, let's say, pharmaceuticals, but then also interested in security, so they can marry those two together. Okay, you want that diversity of thought, you want the background, and it just, God, the meetings that we have with the different people we bring on board are fascinating. You learn so much from your peer, then, and it really just, it's exciting. It's like every day you want to come to work then, not because you're going to be there till midnight trying to figure out what the heck, why can't I find this log file and where isn't this going and all this kind of stuff. But you want to come to work because you're learning constantly from those around you, and they're all thinking differently and they're all coming together in one. And I personally don't like hiring people that don't want to argue, challenge, even if they're wrong, challenge, because it makes me think differently. And I also don't want to be on a team where everybody is the same. It's not even fun anymore. It's like looking in a mirror. Why do that? If I wanted to do that, I'd probably love the pandemic and want to stay home even more, but in this case, we are in one of the most exciting industries there is right now, and because it covers everything, and we need everybody, and we need everybody to help it grow.
Cindy, tell me, what the diversity of thought, how is that a competitive advantage or strategic advantage for different audiences?
Yeah, I mean, I'm going to take it from product delivery. At Tenable, we have to have diversity of thought because I, for one, am from a very rural area. And so I'm not going to assume that everybody has the greatest connectivity. My interfaces need to be able to be usable to different people. If we have IT people building solutions, you're going to have to do probably backflips and pat your head on your hand on your head and rub your tummy at the same time in order to get it to work the way you need it to be. Right now with an app, I mean, Waze, other things, We barely have to touch or have any knowledge, but we can use these powerful tools. And diversity of thought is the way we get there. We need artists. We need artists to be able to articulate very complex images. We need technical writers and English people who can translate the complex to understandable. We need so many more people, and the diversity of thought's not necessarily what you know, it's how you approach a problem. And this problem is huge. So the idea that we need more people in data care is a little easier when you answer that why. Why do we need people? Because we want to protect the data. If we say, why do we need more people in cybersecurity? It sounds like we want to go defend against the nation states and be national security. Whereas we need to boil that down and say it's a personal security. Data care is a personal security piece that you can get involved in and take your talents from wherever you are to come and put that towards it. Training, education, people learn differently. I can't stick a slide in front of somebody and expect that they can learn. But sometimes I can give them a lab and just let them play and dig in there online. And that's a self-learning. So there's so many different ways that people have to take their own story, take their own journey, take their own path, and be able to translate that and listen so that we can all move forward, because those people are out there that need these tools just as much as the people who understand how to develop and code them. We need users, and that's a totally different dynamic.
So my last question, what's your call to action? You are all very passionate. You lead different groups, different foundations, different outreach. What's your call to action to the audience today?
Well, I'll jump in and start.
I'm going to start with you, Cindy.
So one of the things that Ron and I were able to do is start Gula Tech Foundation, where we are donating money to non-profits that concentrate on cybersecurity. And there's many ways that you can get involved. You can mentor, you can donate your time, you can go talk to a class, you can talk to a cohort, but to know that they're there, because the public needs to get engaged. The public is not going to get engaged with the for-profit companies that they have to buy something. Their likely introduction is going to be through a nonprofit, whether it's cybercrime, whether it's teaching, getting more girls and women involved in cyber, or African Americans or minorities, whatever it is, we need to do more education, comic books, coloring books. We need to push that education down into the elementary school, where we're talking, just like washing your hands. And Carlos made the comment about your health hygiene. We need to start talking, articulating, and communicating cyber hygiene, and get the point across that this data care, everybody's engaged. So my call to action is, if you are in cyber, talk about it. Tell people your story. Go visit somebody and tell them how you got to where you are, because it's not like no other story out there, and everybody's path is going to be different, but we need more people. So get involved and really do talk about what you do. Go on podcasts. People are out there listening. Let's get them the information they need.
Now, Mary, you and I spoke also. You're doing some pretty incredible things yourself. So what's your call to action? What should we do?
First of all, I agree with the educate piece, but more importantly, I think we need to lead by example and encourage people to get into this field. When as I was growing through my career, it became this pristine elite group, usually of white males, that was in cyber, and they would be nerds and they would not be able to relate. And it was a very intimidating place to be. It was scary. But when we educate and when we lead by example, when we go out there and I'm on several committees. I volunteer teach at the university for people who receive grants. I work with the Aspirations in Computing Award. That's every state. I'm on the Minnesota Academy of Science and Engineering, which is on all 50 states, where they encourage kids and help them to submit projects for the science and engineering fairs, starting at their school, then to go to region, then to go to state, that sort of thing. But by being there And by encouraging them and by, you know, like Cindy said, not everyone learns the same way. So it's not like, okay, I wasn't good at math in school, therefore I'm going to really, you know, stink at this career. It's not that. It's about critical thinking, and everyone has a passion and everyone has the capability. And when you encourage them and you're there for them, you're speaking to them, and you agree to work with them to help them explain these concepts in ways that you feel that others can understand so they can also do it, a tremendous amount of benefit happens on all sides. First of all, when I'm teaching the class and somebody asks me a question that I've taken, you know, I just know this stuff because it's kind of, you know, I've been doing it for so long, and they ask it in a way that go, well, wait a minute, I don't know that. I don't know that answer. And they start saying, well, why isn't this happening this way? You know, why don't we do this? I learn as much from my students, I think, as I think more I learn from them than they learn from me. And that's what's so gratifying. And when you get out there and you show them, particularly as a woman and as a minority, that I can get up there and I've done this, hopefully I'm paving the path for everyone to take the chance and jump into this. But let me just add one more thing, because I've seen this happen. We have a lot of people out there that mentor, particularly women and minorities in high school. We still have a 70% dropout rate in the hard sciences, including computer science in college, because they get into classrooms as freshmen and sophomore. And, you know, in these types of careers, you work in groups. And when you're the only female in the group, or you're the only minority in the group, or both, you tend to get left out, you get discouraged, and we kind of drop them as they get into that secondary career. And then we try to pick them up again once they graduate, so we can have them have internships at our companies and we can give them more opportunities. But there's that gap area. So I challenge everyone to go out there and say, if you're going to mentor, follow them all the way through. Don't drop them once they get that scholarship into college, and don't pick them up only when that funnel's already taken place and you've got the few that survived the college and or the master's area. And also realize that some of the best people I've worked with don't have college degrees. Some of them are high school dropouts, and they're geniuses. They just need help. They just need a chance. So open up your eyes, open up your ears, and open up your hearts, and be there for people like people were there for us when we were going up through our careers.
That's so important. It's like kind of taking it throughout their career. Like the way I introduced you all, your mentors, colleagues, most importantly, friends and coaches, and a coach. But this is throughout my career, not just today. So, Maureen, what's your ask? What's your call to action?
Everybody take a 3x5 card and take a big marker. You can use any color you want, and write 2 words on it. Be kind. And when you want to raise your voice, when you want to, you know, it's maddening as a CISO and all the things that happen, remember to be kind. Look at what unconscious bias or conscious bias am I bringing to this conversation? Remember how to support people, lift them up. You can put anybody down, especially, you know, once you get to a certain position in life. Your position, just by me talking in a certain tone, will get people to know that you're in charge. But they'll remember how they feel when you're kind, when you sponsor them, not only mentor them, but sponsor them. Take a chance on people that other people might not, much to what Mary and both Cindy have said. And so I take it as a simple action, 3x5 card, got one on my desk. It says, be kind.
I love it. Be a good human. And well, I want to thank you ladies for spending this time with me. Your insight, and again, this is an ongoing thing, not just this moment in time, but before and after, and getting to know you has just been great. So Maureen Allison, Mary France, and Cindy Gula, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it.